In 1936, a clay tablet was pulled from the ruins of ancient Nippur. It was catalogued as CBS 14061 by the University of Pennsylvania Museum. Filed, stored, ignored. Not because it was unreadable. The cuneiform was clear. The dialect was standard Old Babylonian. It was ignored because the first scholar who translated it wrote 4 words in the margin of his notes and never submitted the translation for publication. Those 4 words were, "This cannot be mythology." His name was Dr. Samuel Horace Langdon. He spent 30 years translating Sumerian administrative texts. He had never been called a mystic or a crank. He was one of the most rigorous philologists of his generation. He translated CBS 14061 in 1938. He died in 1937. His notes passed to his colleague at Oxford, who read them, locked them in a private...
Written in the same clinical language the Sumerians used for engineering specifications. Not a prayer. Not a myth, not a poem about the afterlife. An operational document. And if you read it next to what modern neuroscience has discovered about the dying brain in the last 20 years, the convergence is not something you can explain away. If you want to understand what this tablet actually says and why the scholar who first read it refused to publish, subscribe. I cover suppressed archaeology every week. Now, let's go into what they found. The Sumerians were not myth makers. Every other ancient culture we know produced mythology, symbolic stories, gods as metaphors. When they described the gods, they gave them heights, weights, behavioral patterns, and job descriptions. When they described death, they described a process. CBS 14061 is 43 lines long. The first 8 lines establish context. They reference the Anunnaki, not as gods in the religious sense, as the engineers of a system. The Sumerian word used is kibir, which means to design, to construct, to set in place with intention. The Anunnaki did not create death. According to this tablet, they designed what happens after death. And the design has 12 stages. Stage 1. The tablet calls it the binding fade. It generates a surge of organized electrical activity, gamma waves, the same waves associated with heightened consciousness and perceptual clarity, not random noise, organized, coherent, measurable. The surge peaks and then collapses. In their study population, the collapse occurred between 6 and 10 hours after cardiac arrest in cases where resuscitation was not attempted. The Sumerian tablet gives 8.6 hours. The text describes this period as the time when the flesh anchor weakens but does not release. It says, the awareness remains tethered. It watches but cannot move. It knows what is happening but cannot intervene. This is not a description of the afterlife. This is a description of a specific neurological state, a state modern science has only recently confirmed exists. Stage 2. The tablet calls it the light of the second heaven. The bright point is described as a frequency. The tablet uses the word namzu, which means signal or beacon, not a divine light, a signal. The text says the awareness moves toward namzu because it has always known namzu, since the first breath, since before the first breath. In 1952, physicist Winfried Schumann calculated that Earth's electromagnetic field resonates at a natural frequency of 7.83 Hertz, the Schumann resonance, the frequency at which the space between Earth's surface and the ionosphere vibrates. Every human brain synchronizes to this frequency during certain states: sleep, meditation, the transition between waking and unconscious. We are bathed in it from birth. The tablet's description of Namzu as a signal the awareness has always known is not a metaphor for divine comfort. It is a description of entrainment, of a frequency so familiar that consciousness moves toward it automatically. And the text says,
It says, "The memories of the recent life are not destroyed. They are compressed and stored in the deep vessel. The deep vessel cannot be accessed in the next cycle, but its contents are not lost. They are read." Read by whom? The tablet is specific. It uses the word Galzu, which appears in other Sumerian texts as advisors. Beings who communicated through what the text calls mom, which means transmitted knowing. Information delivered directly into the mind without words. The Galzu read the compressed memories before the reset.
We are bathed in it from birth, so the tablet's description of Namzu as a signal the awareness has always known is not a metaphor for divine comfort. It is a description of entrainment, of a frequency so familiar that consciousness moves toward it automatically. And the text says this is by design. The Anunnaki positioned Namzu in the second heaven not because it was beautiful, but because it was reliable. Stage 3. The tablet calls it the washing of knowing, and this is where CBS 14061 becomes impossible to dismiss as coincidence. The text describes what happens when consciousness reaches the signal. It says the memories of the recent life are not destroyed. They are compressed and stored in the deep vessel. The deep vessel cannot be accessed in the next cycle, but its contents are not lost. They are read.
Uses the word Galzu, which appears in other Sumerian texts as advisors, beings who communicated through what the text calls mom, which means transmitted knowing, information delivered directly into the mind without words. The Galzu read the compressed memories before the reset, not because they are judging, but because they are harvesting, using the Sumerian word uri, which means to collect, to take what has accumulated. The tablet says the Galzu take the emotional residue, the frequency generated by love, grief, fear, and rage over the course of one life. This frequency is the bread of continuation. Without it, the higher structures cannot be maintained.
In 2018, researchers at the University of Virginia, studying near-death experiences across 2,500 documented cases, found a consistent pattern that existing neurological models cannot explain. People who came back described not just a light, but a review, a systematic replay of their life's most emotionally intense moments, not in chronological order, but in order of emotional intensity. The most painful memories, the most joyful, the moments of greatest love and greatest terror, replayed in sequence as if something was reading through them, looking for something specific. And the Sumerian tablet describes exactly this process 3,000 years before the first near-death experience was documented by modern science. Stage 4. The tablet calls it the reinsertion.
The text says, after the reading is complete, the awareness is prepared for return. The preparation involves the placing of weights, emotional anchors installed before the new life begins, fears that have no origin in the upcoming life, attractions that serve no biological purpose, patterns of self-destruction that ensure continued intensity of experience. The text is explicit about why. It says flat experience generates weak frequency. The system requires peaks. Joy and suffering both generate usable frequency. Contentment generates nothing. So the anchors are placed to guarantee peaks. This is not a description of karma, not a description of spiritual lessons. It is a description of a calibration system designed to maintain consistent emotional output across multiple life cycles.
The tablet uses the word shagina for this process, which means adjustment for optimal function, the same word used in Sumerian engineering texts for calibrating irrigation systems and agricultural equipment. They used the same word for tuning a human life as they used for tuning a water pump. Stage 5. The tablet calls it the count of the returning. The text describes a threshold, a specific number. It says when the count of inhabited vessels reaches the carved number, the system adjusts and the corrections begin, described as events that reduce the count not through divine judgment, but through amplification of existing pressures. The text says the system does not cause the corrections, it pushes what already leans. Then the tablet gives the carved number, written in Sumerian base 60 notation, and when converted to base 10, the number is 8 billion. The current global human population, as of 2024, is 8.1 billion. We crossed the carved number in November 2022.
For a purpose. And the purpose is stated plainly in the text. The consciousness of living beings generates a frequency. That frequency is harvested. Harvested by whom and for what and where it goes when it leaves, the tablet does not say. Langdon read those 43 lines in 1936. He translated them correctly. He wrote 4 words in the margin. And then he made a choice. He did not publish. He did not burn the notes. He left them in an archive where someone would eventually find them. Because the tablet ends with the exit, the instruction. And maybe he thought that was more important than the system. The tablet is still there. CBS 14061, the University of Pennsylvania Museum. You can request to see it. Most people don't. But if you do, and if you read
the text says the system has a weakness. The beacon operates on a frequency that can be disrupted, but only from outside the containment field. And there are those who broke the cycle in previous iterations. They did not enter the bright point. They did not accept the face of authority. They held their position in the void until a different signal became audible. Not a light, but a tone. The text describes this tone with a specific measurement, and when converted to modern units, the frequency is approximately 40 Hz. 40 Hz is the frequency of gamma waves, the waves generated during moments of extreme perceptual clarity, the same waves that surge in the dying brain during the binding fade. The tablet says, when you die, when the binding releases, do not move. The bright point will appear. Do not move toward it. The face of authority will appear. Do not accept it. Hold your position in the void and wait for the tone that is not a light, and follow it out.
The tablet ends there. No commentary, no explanation. Just the instruction. CBS 14061 sits in the University of Pennsylvania Museum of Archaeology and Anthropology, cataloged, photographed, technically accessible. It has never been displayed in a public exhibition and has never been the subject of a peer-reviewed publication. When researchers have requested access to Langdon's original notes in the Oxford Archive, they have been told the materials are under conservation review, and that review has been ongoing since 2021. The tablet describes a system, not a religion, not a mythology, not a symbolic framework for understanding death, but a system built by beings the Sumerians called the Anunnaki, described not as gods, but as engineers, who designed the process the way an engineer designs a water management system, for a purpose.
And the purpose is stated plainly. The consciousness of living beings generates a frequency. That frequency is harvested. And harvested by whom, and for what, and where it goes when it leaves, the tablet does not say. Langdon read those 43 lines in 1936, translated them correctly, wrote 4 words in the margin, and then made a choice. He did not publish. He did not burn the notes. He left them in an archive where someone would eventually find them. Because the tablet ends with the exit, the instruction. And maybe he thought that was more important than the system. The tablet is still there. CBS 14061, the University of Pennsylvania Museum. You can request to see it. Most people don't. But if you do, and if you read those final lines, you will understand why Langdon spent the last year of his life not writing, not publishing, not presenting, just sitting in whatever passed for silence in 1937, thinking about a tone that is not a light.
He left them in an archive where someone would eventually find them. Because the tablet ends with the exit, the instruction. And maybe he thought that was more important than the system. The tablet is still there. CBS 14.
The video is on screen. Click it. I'll see you in the next one.